Yo guys, how's it going? Ktm here. Welcome back to another video. Today, yet again, we are working on the Ktm 250Sx-F right back here. Now, if you guys haven't seen the last video, I recommend going and check that out. We completely finished up our bottom end. It is all good to go. And today, we're gonna be working on getting a top end onto that motor. And then right back here, I actually have all of our parts all ready to go. All we have to do is slap it all together and install it onto the bottom end. So without further ado, let's get right into this. I'll just give you guys a little update on where we're at with parts and whatnot for our top end. So here's everything we are working with. As you guys can see here, we have a brand new Wiseco piston. I chose this piston particularly just because the piston that I took out of the bike was a Wiseco, so I just decided to get what was already running fine in the bike. Just a new replacement obviously, and this piston comes with rings and everything we need. We have all new gaskets and seals all the way around on this motor, and the top end is going to be no exception. And then we have all of our valve chain components. We have our cylinder head right in here. I haven't assembled anything, as you guys can see. We have all of our components here ready to be assembled. And then I have my cylinder head just chilling. Brand new cylinder head, just in that bag, just so it doesn't collect any dust. But I went ahead and installed our valve stem seals, as well as a couple little oil nozzles here and there, and some O-rings, just some little stuff that I wanted to quickly knock out, just so we didn't really have to worry about doing all that little tedious stuff here on camera, time consuming. So here, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our top end installed onto the motor. Again, I already verified all the measurements when I got this piston here right away as soon as I got parts, just to make sure we did have the right part and that it will work with our cylinder. Now, if you guys haven't seen our cylinder yet, I'd recommend watching our teardown video. And in that video, I was able to get the cylinder completely dialed in with just a light hone, ball hone, and we have a really nice crosshatch, and this cylinder is good. So all we have to do is install our piston onto our crank and then install our cylinder, and then we're gonna go and put together our cylinder head, and I'm gonna take you guys through this whole process. So let's get right into it. Alright, so we are ready to install our brand new piston onto our crank here. I've already gone in and installed the rings, checked the ring gap and all that good stuff. So we are good to go. All we have to do is slide our piston onto our connecting rod and get our wrist pin in, as well as a circlip, which I've already installed one here on the left side of the piston. So we'll just have to throw one in over here as well. Piston is installed and good to go. Now we can install our cylinder base gasket as well as our cylinder. Alright guys, so we're gonna begin assembling our cylinder head here. Now, one part we did have to replace here, I quickly ordered some up, is our intake valve springs. Basically, when you're inspecting a valve spring, besides any obvious breakages, you're measuring the free length of the spring, uncompressed of course, and here basically our intake valve springs are just a little bit out of spec, just a little bit too short, which tells us that they are possibly, a little bit worn out. So I got some brand new intake valve springs so we can get this cylinder head all dialed in. Exhaust valve springs looked great, and then all the other components we're putting back together looked great. But yeah, I did order some new intake valve springs because when putting this engine together, anything that's out of spec I'm going to replace, no questions asked. So yeah, again, the old ones weren't terrible, but here I'll line them up real quick and show you guys so you guys can see on camera the difference. So yeah, we are going to be installing these at the same time as we are assembling our cylinder head, but yeah, let's get right to this. And throughout the whole assembly, I'm going to be using this here as our assembly lubricant. This is just some assembly grease. I prefer this over engine oil or a traditional assembly lube because it's a little bit thicker and it holds its place a little better, which for the cylinder head, where it's the highest part of the engine and it relies the most heavily on oil pressure, This is going to be great to have during the first startup, just because we don't have to worry about this stuff possibly running out of the places we apply it to. It'll pretty much stay in there until oil takes over and does its thing as the engine builds oil pressure initially. So this is what I'm going to use for pretty much the whole assembly for this cylinder head. And then just a little reminder, we have a brand new cylinder head, brand new OEM cams, and new seals, new gaskets, and then of course any parts that were outside of OEM spec for wear, we replaced. And just in case anyone wants the nitty-gritty specs here on the valve spring wear tolerances, I'll put on the screen the spec, but these ones measure out at approximately 42.26 millimeters. And then our new ones, just out of the bag, are sitting here at looks like about 42.96. Alrighty guys, so we have our cylinder head all finished up and complete. I went ahead and took this thing inside because it's really hot in here in the garage, and I set our valve clearances so we are all good to go, and this thing is pretty much ready to be bolted on to our bottom end right over here. Picking up where we left off, we have our cylinder installed, our piston installed, and we can pretty much drop this thing on to the motor. So let's do that. Alright guys, we are ready to drop the cylinder head here onto the cylinder, and overall I'm kind of excited because this marks a really monumental point in this build, and we've never really had a cylinder head on this engine before, so I'm pretty excited. Let's get this thing on. Here, when installing the head bolts and washers, the KTM service manual specifies these be lubricated with engine oil, so I'm going to do that as we install these. And for torquing our cylinder head nuts, we are going to torque these in a diagonal pattern in 3 steps. We are going to do our first torque to 7.4 pound-feet of torque, second step to 22 pound-feet of torque, and then our third step, which is going to be our final torque, is going to be 36.9 pound-feet of torque. And now for our final tightening torque of 36.9 pound-feet of torque. Here on the right side of an engine, we have a washer and a nut that will go to 7.4 pound-feet of torque. Here for our timing chain tensioner, this bike actually came with an aftermarket one already, a Dirtrex unit, so this is a slight improvement over stock. And yeah, we have all the parts, so let's get it installed. Then we have a spring and a cap to install. While we're working on this side of the engine, we have an exhaust flange to install, and I added just a little bit of anti-seize to the threads on these bolts because this is such a hot part of the engine. We don't want these bolts to seize in the long run. So here, one last time before we put our cylinder head cover on, I'm going to verify our valve clearances. Although I did just set them, we're going to check it now that everything is torqued down and completely installed onto our cylinder head. Starting with our exhaust valves. So our valves are within OEM spec. For our intake, we are looking at 0.10 millimeters, and for our exhaust, we're looking at 0.13. Now that is pretty close to the tighter end of the service limit. So after the first ride, when we double check it, that's just something to keep in mind. If they tighten up at all, we're definitely going to want to increase the clearance a little bit. But we're good to go for our first ride. And then after we get at least a couple hours on this motor, we'll go back in, we'll check all the valve clearances again, and if we need to make any adjustments, we'll do that then. Alright guys, just like that, our engine build for our 2019 KTM 250Sx-F is all done. Definitely took a while, but I'm really happy with the end result. Didn't want to cut any corners, didn't want to skip any steps, really wanted to make sure this engine is all good to go. Only thing I haven't put in is our spark plug here, and that I'm going to leave out of the motor for now. Once we do get this engine back in the bike, I'm going to turn it over without the spark plug in it so it doesn't build any compression. And that is just so we can build some oil pressure within the engine before we do the first start. But for now, we're gonna leave that out. And very soon we're gonna be getting this engine back into the chassis, and hopefully we're gonna get the first start going, and that's assuming nothing else is wrong on the bike. I really don't know. That's just something we're gonna have to find out when we get there. But yeah, make sure you guys subscribe so you guys don't miss any upcoming videos with this bike. Don't worry, the plans for this bike don't quite stop at the engine. I have other things I want to do to the bike, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.